Some stories begin in the most unassuming moments, a quiet morning at a bustling financial institution, where the hum of routine business belies the life-altering events about to unfold. In a busy branch of First American Trust, a building that echoed with murmurs of everyday frustration and hope alike, a day began to turn into something extraordinary. The bank's lobby was crowded with customers, families in faded denim, young professionals in crisp suits, and elderly patrons whose lined faces told the story of a lifetime of hard work. In the midst of it all stood an unremarkable figure whose plight was about to transform an entire community. Before we dive deeper into this tale, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing to our channel. Tomorrow, we have another special narrative waiting just for you. Eleanor Reed, a gentle, elderly woman with soft eyes and a dignified air, clutched a well-worn envelope as she navigated the maze of long lines and murmuring voices. To most, a routine banking errand might seem trivial, but for Eleanor, the charges inexplicably applied to her account were a matter of survival. She had spent her entire life scrimping and saving, trusting that her modest means would be respected, and today, however, that trust was about to be betrayed. Gathering a deep breath, as if summoning the courage of every hardship she had weathered, Eleanor stepped forward toward one of the service counters. She adjusted the collar of her faded cardigan and forced a confident smile, though a quiver in her hand betrayed her inner uncertainty. "I hope they can set this right," she murmured to herself, glancing down at the envelope that contained a labyrinth of unexplained fees. Behind the counter, a young teller named Chelsea Morgan was busy at work. Her eyes darted from screen to screen, her expression one of weary resignation as she tapped at her keyboard. It was clear that her day, too, had been weighed down by the relentless pressure of the system. When Eleanor reached the counter, Chelsea barely looked up. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" she asked in a tone that sounded more rehearsed than caring. With trembling determination, Eleanor held out the envelope. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've noticed some fees on my account that I don't understand. I believe there's been a mistake, and I brought all the relevant documents." Her words were laced with the quiet desperation of someone who had fought long battles against forces far more powerful than herself. Chelsea finally met her gaze, though it was brief and guarded. "Let us see what you've got," she said mechanically as she accepted the envelope. Flipping through its contents with practiced disinterest, she read aloud, "These fees are standard, they're clearly outlined in your account agreement." Her tone was dismissive, and as she slid the papers back toward Eleanor, a ripple of discontent began to stir among the onlookers. Eleanor's heart sank. "I can't possibly afford these charges," she whispered, the injustice of it all pressing down on her like a crushing weight. "I was never informed that such fees would be applied, and I've always kept my account in good standing." From behind the counter, a bank employee who seemed to radiate a sense of superiority stepped forward. Calvin Brooks, a mid-level manager with a slick haircut and an air of self-importance, cut off Eleanor's attempt to speak. "Ma'am," he said with a dismissive smile, "if you think there's been an error, you should have read the fine print before opening your account. Our policies are clear. If you want to avoid fees, you need to maintain a higher balance." His words, uttered with a careless arrogance, echoed off the tiled walls, drawing snatches of whispers from other patrons. The atmosphere in the bank shifted palpably, conversations halted, and every eye in the room turned toward the unfolding confrontation. Eleanor felt as though the entire bank were silently condemning her, yet even as her eyes welled with unshed tears of humiliation, she clung to a fragile hope that reason might yet prevail. "I just want what's fair," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of both anger and sorrow. Calvin's tone turned icy. "Fair is defined by the contract, ma'am, and you signed it. If these fees are burdensome for you, perhaps this isn't the bank for your needs." His words, intended to belittle, instead ignited a spark of indignation in the small crowd. Some customers exchanged sympathetic glances, others, reluctant to get involved, looked away with downcast eyes. Just as it seemed that Eleanor's attempt to secure justice would be met only with further condescension, an unexpected figure stepped forward from the quiet corner of the bank, clad in a casual jacket and a baseball cap. The man had been observing the exchange with quiet intensity. Slowly, he advanced toward the counter, his steady gait commanding attention without demanding it. "Excuse me," he said in a calm yet firm voice that cut through the charged silence like a ray of sunlight on a cloudy day, "why is this lady being spoken to in such a manner?" The entire bank fell silent as every head turned toward him. At first glance, he appeared as an unassuming patron, but there was a gravitas in his tone, a firmness that immediately set him apart. Calvin Brooks's face reddened with irritation. "And who are you to question our procedures?" he snapped, crossing his arms in a gesture of feigned authority. The man slowly removed his cap, revealing the familiar, cool features of none other than Keanu Reeves. In that instant, disbelief spread through the room like wildfire. Whispers of astonishment, punctuated by incredulous murmurs and a few stifled chuckles, filled the air. Keanu's eyes locked onto Calvin's, and his voice, still calm yet imbued with quiet strength, resonated throughout the space. "It doesn't matter who I am," Keanu replied, his tone measured and unwavering. "What matters is that every customer deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. I'd like to know, why is this lady being humiliated over something that appears to be nothing more than an error?" The impact of his words was electric. Even Chelsea Morgan, who had maintained her cool facade until now, looked visibly unsettled as she shifted her eyes between the two men. Eleanor, standing small yet resolute behind the counter, could hardly believe the surreal turn of events. "Sir, I am just trying to understand these charges," Eleanor stammered, her voice gaining strength as she saw a glimmer of hope. "They were never explained to me, and I have always kept my finances in order." Calvin's features hardened as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "Ms." he began, but Keanu interjected before he could continue. "Please, call her Eleanor," Keanu said kindly, "because I believe Eleanor has every right to know what's happening with her account." He reached out and carefully took the envelope from Chelsea, glancing over the documents with a critical eye. "Now, let us see here," he murmured, reading aloud in a tone that conveyed both measured curiosity and quiet indignation. "These fees began appearing unexpectedly and seem to have increased dramatically over time. Tell me, Mr. Brooks, can you explain why these maintenance charges have nearly tripled without any clear justification?" Calvin's eyes darted nervously. "I am sure there's an explanation in the system," he stuttered, his voice betraying a hint of panic for the first time. "It's merely a system error." "A system error?" Keanu repeated, his voice laced with disbelief and a touch of irony. "Errors happen, but they rarely single out elderly customers as if they're disposable. Eleanor, have you noticed that these charges only started appearing in the past couple of months?" Eleanor nodded slowly, the evidence of her financial hardship written clearly across her weary face. "Yes," she replied softly, "they weren't there before, and suddenly my savings are disappearing without any notice." At that moment, the entire branch seemed to hold its breath. The everyday hum of voices and footsteps had faded into an expectant silence, as if everyone sensed that this confrontation was about to expose something far more sinister than a mere clerical mistake. Calvin, now visibly shaken, leaned forward with a nervous glint in his eye. "Look, I assure you that if there was any wrongdoing, it wasn't intentional," he insisted, his voice, which had been smooth and condescending moments ago, now wavered under the pressure of Keanu's unwavering gaze. "Our bank has policies in place to ensure fairness, and these fees are applied automatically. There's nothing personal about it." Keanu's jaw tightened as he set the envelope back on the counter with deliberate care. "Automatic or not, the system appears to be rigged in a way that preys on the most vulnerable," he said, his tone becoming increasingly resolute. "Let us review these documents together, shall we?" Drawing on the rich tapestry of American resilience and justice, Keanu invited not just Eleanor but the entire branch of customers to witness the truth. "We're not just dealing with an accounting error," he declared, his words echoing against the polished marble. "We're looking at a deliberate exploitation of trust, a scheme designed to siphon money from those who can least afford it, and that, my friends, is something I simply cannot stand by." As murmurs of agreement began to swell among the gathered customers, Chelsea Morgan fidgeted nervously. "Mr. Reeves," she started, but Keanu cut her off with a raised hand. "I understand that you follow strict guidelines, but let us be honest, these fees seem arbitrary, especially when they only affect certain accounts. Eleanor, please confirm, did these charges suddenly appear despite your long-standing relationship with this bank?" Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes as she replied, "Yes, I've been with First American Trust for decades. I've never seen anything like this before." The atmosphere grew thick with tension, even as some customers exchanged knowing glances reminiscent of a classic small-town showdown. Like a scene from an old Western film, Calvin Brooks was forced to confront the possibility that this was no simple mistake. His fingers drummed nervously on the counter, and sweat began to bead on his forehead as he opened a new browser window on the bank's computer system. "What exactly do these documents say about the inception of these fees?" Keanu pressed, his voice a mix of challenge and concern. "I see here that the fees began appearing in accounts similar to Eleanor's, particularly those held by our senior patrons. Isn't that right, Mr. Brooks?" Calvin's composure finally shattered. I need to review the system logs," he mumbled, glancing around at his colleagues. Chelsea, whose earlier confidence had melted into palpable anxiety, huddled near him as if seeking refuge. With a shaking hand, Calvin began to type rapidly into the computer, his eyes darting across lines of code and transaction logs. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as the rest of the bank watched in stunned silence. The very air seemed charged with the electricity of a live broadcast, reminiscent of high-stakes moments in American courtroom dramas or sports finals. Outside, the sound of a distant siren and the murmur of passing traffic underscored the gravity of the moment. Finally, Calvin's trembling voice broke through the silence. "It appears, these fees have been systematically applied to multiple accounts, mostly those belonging to elderly customers. This isn't just a mistake, it looks like, it's a deliberate scheme." His admission sent shockwaves through the room. Faces that had been etched with the lines of routine despair now lit up with a mix of anger and vindication. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his tone both gentle and unyielding. "A scheme, you say? How many people have been affected by this injustice?" he demanded, his voice steady as a judge's gavel in a packed courtroom. Calvin hesitated, then mumbled, "I am not sure, perhaps hundreds." His admission landed like a bombshell, and a murmur of outrage rippled through the assembled customers. Eleanor, who had once appeared fragile, now stood straighter, her eyes blazing with the determination of someone who had weathered too many storms to remain silent in the face of corruption. At that moment, Keanu pulled out his smartphone and began recording. "What you're witnessing is not just an error, it's a breach of trust," he announced, addressing both Calvin and the gathering crowd. "This is a bank manager essentially confessing that his institution has been exploiting our most vulnerable citizens for profit, and I assure you, I won't be leaving until every single affected person is given the justice they deserve." Calvin's panic was evident as he stuttered, "Please, Mr. Reeves, let us handle this internally. I can fix this, just give me a little time." But Keanu's expression remained resolute, and he interrupted, "Time is a luxury that those suffering cannot afford. This isn't just about reimbursing lost money, it's about restoring dignity and trust in a system that should serve the people." A palpable silence fell over the branch as even the bank's indifferent security guard paused to watch. Customers, once resigned to bureaucratic indifference, now leaned in, their eyes shining with the hope of collective empowerment. "Justice," Keanu continued, "is not a favor, it's a right, and today, we're holding those in power accountable for every single act of exploitation." As the drama unfolded, Chelsea Morgan's earlier indifference gave way to remorse. "I am so sorry," she murmured, almost to herself, as if recognizing that her role in the machine had contributed to a system that devalued human worth. Keanu offered her a gentle smile, one that conveyed both understanding and a firm demand for change. We're all part of this system, but that doesn't mean we should let it trample on our humanity. The recording continued as Keanu pressed further, his questions now sharp and incisive. Mr. Brooks, how do you justify a policy that preys on our elders? How do you sleep at night knowing that people like Eleanor, who've given their whole lives to this community, are being exploited? His words, delivered with the conviction of a seasoned advocate, resonated with a blend of American idealism and practical anger reminiscent of protest songs and grassroots movements. Calvin's attempts to justify the policy faltered under the weight of the evidence and the unyielding scrutiny of both Keanu and the awakened customers. Finally, his voice broke as he whispered, "It was a mistake, a system error that we let spiral out of control," but his words rang hollow in the charged silence that followed. In that moment, Eleanor felt a profound shift, not just in the balance of power at the bank, but within herself. Years of silent endurance had built up into a reservoir of courage. With a trembling but determined voice, she said, "I'm not alone. I've seen my friends, my neighbors, all struggling to get by on meager pensions. We deserve better than this charade of fees and excuses." Keanu nodded solemnly. "We'll make sure the truth comes out," he promised. "This isn't just about correcting an error, it's about shining a light on injustice wherever it hides, and I won't stop until every victim is heard." As Calvin Brooks finally sank into a resigned slump behind the counter, the bank manager's confession and the live recording sent shockwaves through the institution. Within hours, the branch's higher management was forced to issue a public statement, a sweeping promise of audits, accountability, and reform. Both Calvin Brooks and Chelsea Morgan were removed from their positions pending a full investigation, and plans were set in motion to reimburse all those affected by the fraudulent fees. In the days that followed, Keanu Reeves' video went viral, a beacon of hope for those who had been marginalized by an indifferent system. News outlets and social media channels buzzed with discussions of corporate greed and the fight for consumer rights. The story quickly became emblematic of a broader movement against systemic exploitation, drawing parallels to historic protests and modern calls for transparency. Memes comparing the bank's policies to absurd elements of late-night comedy and even tongue-in-cheek references to American pop icons were shared widely, injecting a note of humor into a struggle that was deeply serious. For Eleanor, the experience was nothing short of transformative. When she returned to the branch to collect her compensation, a sum that not only reimbursed her losses but also provided additional support for the hardships she had endured, her eyes shone with quiet pride. "I never imagined I'd have someone like Mr. Reeves standing by my side," she said softly, a tear of gratitude mingling with a smile that was both wistful and triumphant. "Today, I felt seen, and I felt heard." Keanu, ever the steady force, offered her a gentle nod and a final piece of advice that resonated with every soul present: "Never let anyone tell you that you're less than you are, whether you're young or old, wealthy or struggling. Every person deserves respect, and sometimes, it takes just one voice to spark a revolution." His words, delivered with the ease of a seasoned storyteller and the gravitas of a moral compass, lingered long after the crowd had dispersed. In the wake of the scandal, First American Trust underwent radical changes. A sweeping audit of all customer accounts was initiated, and a new ethos of accountability was instilled from the top down. For many of the bank's longtime patrons, those who had silently borne the brunt of hidden fees and unspoken injustices, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Social media erupted with hashtags celebrating the courage of everyday heroes and calling for further reform across the financial industry. In a quiet neighborhood diner not far from the bank, a classic American establishment with red vinyl booths and a jukebox playing old rock and roll hits, strangers found themselves discussing the events of that fateful day. Over cups of steaming coffee and slices of apple pie, they shared stories of similar struggles and the hope that had been rekindled by one man's unwavering commitment to justice. One regular, A retired factory worker with a penchant for quoting movie lines summed it up perfectly. In America, we're known for fighting for what's right, even if it means standing up to the big guys, and today, Mr. Reeves reminded us all of that. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor's story evolved into a symbol of resilience. Community meetings were held, local news segments featured in-depth interviews with victims of the fee scheme, and advocacy groups rallied to ensure that no one else would ever be taken advantage of in such a callous manner. In one memorable town hall, a young woman, half jokingly yet earnestly, remarked, "If even our banks can't treat us with basic decency, what hope do we have?" Her words were met with laughter and applause, reminder that humor, even in the darkest times, can be a powerful tool for change. Keanu Reeves, ever the unassuming hero, continued to lend his support quietly, though he eventually returned to his film projects and philanthropic endeavors. The memory of that day remained etched in the minds of those who had been present. In interviews that followed, he spoke not just of the incident but of a broader belief in the power of community, of standing up for one another, and of the American spirit that refuses to be broken by injustice. "We all have a role to play," he said in one heartfelt interview, "and sometimes the smallest voice can make the loudest difference." In the aftermath, reforms rippled across the banking industry. New policies were introduced to ensure transparency in fee structures and to protect the rights of all customers, especially the elderly. Legislators cited the incident as a turning point, a reminder that even in the complex world of finance, basic human decency must prevail. The case was studied in business ethics classes and became a case study in consumer advocacy seminars, inspiring countless others to scrutinize and challenge the status quo. Even as the dust settled, the emotions of that day lingered like a bittersweet refrain in the hearts of those involved. For Eleanor, the experience had been both a painful reckoning and a powerful affirmation of her worth. As she walked home each day, the streets of her neighborhood seemed a little brighter, the faces of passers-by kinder, and the community around her stronger than ever. In quiet moments, she would recall the determined gaze of Keanu Reeves and the solidarity of strangers who had united in the face of corporate indifference. And so, in a country built on the promise of fairness and opportunity, the events at First American Trust became more than just a scandal. They became a rallying cry, a call for justice, for empathy, and for the unwavering belief that every person, regardless of age or circumstance, deserves to be treated with respect. Keanu Reeves' intervention had transformed a moment of humiliation into a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit, proving that even in the face of systemic injustice, hope can prevail. As the story spread far and wide, through social media feeds, local news broadcasts, and even late-night talk show monologues, it became a part of modern American folklore. In living rooms and coffee shops across the nation, people would recount the day when an everyday bank and its callous policies were challenged by the courage of one elderly woman and the unexpected heroism of a Hollywood star. And as debates raged about the need for reform and accountability, one message remained clear. Respect and justice are not privileges, they are rights that every American should fiercely defend. In the end, the legacy of that day was felt not only in policy changes and financial restitution but in the renewed sense of community and solidarity that blossomed among those who had once been silenced. Eleanor, now regarded as a local hero, found herself invited to community forums and advocacy panels. In one such forum, speaking before an audience of impassioned citizens, she declared, "I stand here not just as a victim of a broken system, but as a testament to the fact that when we come together, we can reclaim our dignity and forge a better future." The story, rich with the hues of pain, loss, and ultimately triumph, serves as a stirring reminder that every individual's voice matters. It reminds us that while systems may falter, the relentless pursuit of justice and the willingness to stand up for one another can bring about change that resonates across generations. And in that spirit, the legacy of that fateful day at First American Trust continues to inspire a movement, one built on the promise of equality, empathy, and the enduring American Dream. May this tale serve as a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt voiceless or betrayed by the institutions meant to protect them. In a world where the odds sometimes seem stacked against the little guy, let it be known that courage, solidarity, and a dash of Hollywood magic can spark a revolution of compassion and fairness. And so, as the story of Eleanor Reed, Calvin Brooks, Chelsea Morgan, and the unexpected intervention by Keanu Reeves reverberates across our culture, remember this: no matter how insurmountable the challenge may seem, the pursuit of justice is a journey worth taking, and one that can transform even the most ordinary day into an extraordinary chapter in the American narrative. May we all carry forward the lesson that respect, empathy, and the courage to confront injustice are the true measures of our humanity. Share this story, let its message resonate, and never forget, every voice counts, and every act of kindness is a step toward a better tomorrow.